You're listening to The Other 50%, a Her Story of Hollywood. I'm Julie Harris Walker. This is the podcast where I talk to successful women in entertainment and hear their stories. This episode is brought to you by the entertainment payroll company Extreme Reach. They have the most comprehensive suite of tools and services to support all areas of media and content creation, from tax incentive support to accounting software and payroll services. And for commercials, they offer talent negotiations and editing, content delivery, and residuals. And in terms of culture, they are committed to becoming the most inclusive and diverse payroll company in the business. And I can't think of a better shared value for this podcast. Now, for this episode, I sat down with Allegra Clegg. Allegra is the Senior Vice President of Physical Production at Paramount Pictures. Before becoming an executive, Allegra was a producer and production manager on no less than 4 Transformer movies, along with Paranormal Activity 4 and a favorite of mine, The American President. And you can peruse the rest of her credits on IMDB because there are a lot of them, too many to list here. She is a serious badass. We talked about what it took to rise to the top of the production world, how it was to make the shift to a studio job, what is important, what matters, what factors into your important career decisions. You can find us at theother50%.com for added features, photos, show notes, the merchandise. You can also listen on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Podbay, basically all of your podcast providers. Also, if you haven't yet, please go try out the new podcast I'm producing called Exit 38. It's a show where 2 people who seem to be opposites from a political perspective discuss the issues of the day while trying to find common ground. I know I'm biased, but I love it. They are both so smart and thoughtful and kind and interesting. So go try Exit 38 and subscribe. You can also find it on Apple Podcasts and all the podcast places. Okay, here is my conversation with Allegra. Have a listen. What is your current job?
I work at Paramount Pictures in physical production, so I'm in a department where we oversee the making of the movies. So we're tasked with helping the creative group figure out how much a movie is going to cost, how to make it for the best price, where to make it, and if a script is too large, we give suggestions of how to bring it down because the production cost might be too expensive and not what they want to spend on that type of movie. So we can give different suggestions. And before I was in-house at Paramount, I'll give you an example of kind of like how you can look at movies differently. And so that's kind of affects how I do my job now.
Yeah.
I was working on a movie called Ouija, based on the Ouija board game. And it was a big movie, like a Romancing the Stone, all over the world. Machu Picchu, the catacombs of Rome.
A lot of moving parts.
Tons. It was probably $100 million movie when you travel that much with the amount of action that was in the script.
Sure.
So when we did the budget and the research and all of that, it came to that price, and the studio, not Paramount, but another studio said, we're not interested in spending that kind of money on this movie. So goodbye, thank you, which is fine. And I said the only way, and they said something about making it for less than $10 million.
What?
And I said the only way you could do that is if you do it, where you take it and the kids are playing a Ouija board in a house and it's like a haunted kind of horror movie. And though I didn't see the end result, but that's what they ended up doing. They partnered with Blumhouse. They made it for under $5 million and it was a huge hit.
They know how to do that.
But again, you look at the pages, right? And the pages in a script tell you what type of movie it is, how much it's going to cost, and it doesn't vary that much. I always say it bobs up and down.
Right, so it's people, time, equipment.
People, time, like if you have children in it, night work, animals, water work, 4 locations, international locations. It's just all costs money.
Yeah.
So you can pivot and make a different choice and bring the cost down. But again, if you don't, we're making Pet Sematary right now, remaking it at Paramount. Mm-hmm. And, it's an iconic Stephen King movie, and you can't do it without a pet, without children, and without nights, and those tend to cost.
Expensive.
They add to the cost. It's not an expensive movie, but it's not going to be a $2 million horror movie. So there are just certain choices you make. So that's why I like my job now, because I used to make the movies and be part of them. Now I'm like the editor where I oversee them and kind of help guide them in the right direction.
And you hire all the people who are managing the movie?
I hire a lot of them. And, I influence that. And it depends on if a director comes in with their group, they've worked with the same group over and over again, or not. And you say, I would suggest this person would be a great production designer for this movie, and this costume designer can do anything, and is really good with budget plus creative, so you kind of get the best of both worlds. So it's all group effort in that sense, trying to cast the movie properly with the crew.
Now, I would love to hear how you started, because I was looking at your credits, and you have a million of them and giant movies. And let's talk about the very beginning. How did you know this is what you wanted to do, and then how'd you get in?
I grew up in Los Angeles, and my mother was had a career as a ballerina. She was a prima ballerina with New York City Ballet for 10 years, and with the original New York City Ballet with George Balanchine. And when she retired, she went back to South Africa, and where she was born, and started a company there, and then re-met my father. They got married and had me. And then
in South Africa?
In South Africa. I was born in South Africa. And my mom said, she basically said, yes, I'll marry you, but I don't want to live here. Because she had lived in New York and the United States. And, though she loved it, it was just a very hard time. There was still apartheid, and she just didn't like that environment of living in that kind of tension. So my dad agreed to that, and he said, I'll move to the States, but not New York. So California is a great compromise because the weather is almost the same as South Africa in the sense of the climate and everything, and having the beaches.
And we almost have everything you have in New York.
I love Los Angeles, and I love New York, but I love Los Angeles more. So she came here and she opened a ballet school, West Side School of Ballet, which has been there for over 50 years. And so that's kind of how we ended up in Los Angeles. And I think growing up in around the arts and ballet.
Did you dance too?
I did. I grew up dancing. I went to New York, got scholarships to SAB, which is New York City Ballet School, and ABT, American Ballet School. And then at a certain point, I got too tall. I'm 5'9". So, and that's tall for a female dancer because you go on point.
You could still be a Rockette.
You could have been a Rockette, for sure. And then you just realize, like any athlete, you're not perfect. It's like, your leg doesn't quite go high enough. You're not perfectly turned out. I have great feet. I have long legs. But, so it's just like anything. You just have to be perfect as that athlete. And I probably could have pursued it in a different way, but it just ended up not being the thing for me. And then on top of being around that world, in Los Angeles, you're in the film business.
Right.
And, so many people are involved in that. So
it's company town.
It is. And so I worked for a producer, just as his assistant a little bit. I went to Westlake, which was Harvard Westlake, and it was so intense. And I was like, I needed a break and didn't want to go to college right away. So I worked a little bit, and I was like, I'm going to go to college. So I went to UC Santa Barbara. I loved it there. And then I ended up going to San Francisco because I didn't want to move back to LA right away.
But now what'd you study?
I studied communications. I got a liberal arts degree. I got a degree in life, I think, right?
And that's the point, right? That's the point.
Right. My dad lost his job halfway through college, so I had to pay for college myself, and just lots of things that happen in life. But ended up in San Francisco and worked in the film business in the costume department, realized that wasn't for me, and ended up getting hired in a commercial company as their production coordinator. And that was a good fit for me in the sense I'm very organized, I love writing lists, love checking things off list. I can multitask.
You're like, this is my jam.
So it suited me. The actual company I worked for and the person I worked for, it wasn't a good fit. I think that's the only job I quit in my career. And then I got a job just as a day player on a television movie in San Francisco, and I met the writer, and he said he was writing something and that the producer he was writing it for in LA needed some help. So I connected with that producer on the phone, and he said, sure, I just need someone for 2 weeks. I said, great. So I drove down to LA, stayed at my parents' house, and it was John Davison who produced Robocop.
Oh.
So I worked for him.
That's an okay job.
It was great. So I worked for him for 2 weeks, and he said, would you like a job, permanently, to work on this movie? And I said, I'd love it. I have a wedding that I'm going to, but when I come back, that'd be great. And so I always call that, I worked for him for 2 years, and in that 2-year span, it was just he and I for almost a year, kind of prepping Robocop, and he found the director finally, Paul Verhoeven, cast Peter Weller as Robocop. Then, it just took so much time in all the development of it, the suit that he wears, because, those things weren't as readily available, or they didn't have all the Marvel movies and all those costumes, right?
You're inventing it,
right? So it was one of the first things, and CG wasn't as developed as it is today. So it was just interesting. I call it my film school.
Yeah, I was going to ask, was that your film school?
It really was. And at a certain point, I said, and then on top of it, he was helping Alex Koch do Sid and Nancy, and they were coming in to do auditions in our little 3-office suite, and the actresses are throwing the phones and total method audition, like being this heroin addict or whatever they were being, right? So it was just interesting. And John had produced Airplane, and, just an interesting person, right?
Yeah.
And so it was really nice to work with him. And at a certain point, he said, I said, I don't want to be your assistant on this movie. I want to be the production coordinator. And I never coordinated a movie. Ever.
But you knew you could.
I knew I could, and I had been around it enough, and I had done it a little bit on commercials. So he said, that'd be great. Let's see who I hire as the line producer and the production manager. And the production manager was new at it, and so it's one of those moments in my life that it all came together. Mm-hmm. And the production manager was Charles Neuwirth, and the producer was Arnie Schmidt, and they're still like my brothers to this day. It's like we are such close friends, and it's like every now and again there's a magical movie in that sense where you have these great connections and things just come together. And literally we met each other on the plane flying to Dallas to start prepping this movie, and he inherited me, and it just worked out great. So
then did you stay with him for a while?
He and I worked together on many, many movies, yes. And I was his coordinator. And then at a certain point I'm like, I don't want to do this anymore. I want to move on. But because the Directors Guild, to be a production manager, you have to go through the assistant director route. And it's very limited in how to get in, just one track. And I wanted to be a production manager.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to go back and be an AD and, start my career again in that sense. I had done enough work to be qualified for that.
So what'd you do? So
I said to Charles, I want to do this. He's like, he couldn't hire me. So then to Arnie, who was the producer, it was a time when producers were being asked to be like double titles, like the producer and the production manager, to save some money. So I said, there's a production supervisor, right? There's this title. There's only a few people have done it, but I'd like to have you consider me for that. And he was a little bit of like, no, you don't know what you're doing. You haven't come through the AD route, because he had come that way, right?
Yeah.
And I said, no, I do. And then he didn't hire me. Then he couldn't. It just little things happened where finally he got a job where they wanted him to do the dual role. And he said, you said this to me, and you said this might be a good fit for you and I.
And now it sounds like a good idea.
So I'm in a situation where I need that, and do you want to try that? And I said, yeah, of course, yes.
Yes.
So it was a movie called Josh and Sam, and it was, kids. We started in Montana. It was a road movie. And what I learned about my job path as a coordinator was that being in the office and everything filtering through the office, and especially the production coordinator, you are dealing with every department. You know how rentals and deals are made. Mm-hmm. You're part of making those deals and facilitating them. So I knew much more than I thought I knew, plus more than Arnie thought I knew.
Yeah.
Like when we had a first budget meeting, he's like, how does she know all this stuff? Because
I've been looking at it.
He came a different pathway. He came through the AD pathway to become a production manager than a producer. So it was an interesting moment. And again, and I liked being more in charge. Mm-hmm. It was I was done being a production coordinator. I loved that, but I wanted to do more and be more part of the decision making. So that started me on the path of working as the production manager, but not being acknowledged as that because I wasn't in the Directors Guild.
Yeah, let's talk about that for a minute, because I know there's a lot of talk around it, because production supervisor seems to come up through the office and UPM comes up through
the
ADing.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can't ever get in the DGA from the production supervisor side?
No.
So you can't, even though it's often the same job.
It is the same job. Like I sometimes, when I was just a production manager or like on a big movie like Transformers, I would hire supervisors to help me with units. But when I was hired as a production supervisor, the producer took the UPM, the production manager title, for the purposes of satisfying the guild. But the duties that I did, like approving the time cards, signing the checks, hiring the crew, making the deals for equipment, were all like production manager duties.
Right. So that in that position you also don't get union benefits?
No.
And is it also true that that position is predominantly women?
At least 70%.
Okay, so how do we bridge...
predominantly women.
How do we bridge this gap?
So it took me... and then they were always, like, when I was trying to get into the guild, I even met with them and I said, all these articles are coming out of how few women you have and I can do the job.
here's a quick fix.
You'll get, more benefits from me paying into the pension, health, and welfare, and it's a win-win situation.
Yeah.
And they're like, we can't do it. And so I said, you know what? I'm going to get hired anyway because my relationships, whether it's with Charles Neuwirth or Arnie Schmidt or whoever it is, are going to hire me because that's a relationship we have. That's, when you get hired to do a movie, you hire your crew.
Yeah.
And you hire the people that make it work for you because you're responsible for the whole movie. So I'm going to get the job regardless. You're going to lose out on my dues, my benefits, everything. They didn't care. So I started manipulating this system in the sense of how do I manipulate it to get in? So I would get on a movie that wasn't signatory with the Directors Guild. I'd be hired as a production manager, and then when we became signatory, they couldn't kick me out because I was already part of the movie. So they
But you got in while it flipped.
Yes.
That was smart.
But it took me 8 years to officially get into the Directors Guild, though I worked as a production manager through that whole time.
Wow.
And very, very frustrating.
Well, it seems to make no sense. Like there's
But there's different pathways. I think my thought is whatever union it is, have an open door policy because the people are not going to get hired because they're in the guild.
Right.
The people are going to get hired because of their skill level and their relationships. And the film business is very unforgiving. Mm-hmm. If you don't show up on time every single day, if you don't do your job 110%, you're not going to make it. So you can do one movie and not do it well, and that word will get around like, oh, you just hired Allegra Clegg to be your production manager on whatever, Transformers, how was she? And if it wasn't a good experience, I wouldn't get the next job.
Sure.
So and there are different pathways, like maybe that was the pathway 40 years ago from assistant director to UPM, but the pathways could be, you could be a location manager who are dealing with a ton of different contracts and people and negotiations, things like that, an accountant, a production coordinator. There have been Teamsters, people that are, it just depends on your skill level and how much you take on within those other jobs that can teach you how to be a production manager.
Yeah.
And I've had assistant directors who I love who've called me up and asked me questions. For example, when you rent a equipment package, you might have it a daily, like it's a 1-day rental, which means you pay 1 day for 5 days.
Yeah.
And assistant directors multiple times have called me up and didn't understand that. Whereas a production coordinator is in the office dealing with that, right? And knows that a 0.5 day week or a 3-day week or whatever it is, they know what it is. And I've had assistant directors who've called me up after they've done their production manager job, and it's like, I never want to do that. Again, because you're negotiating all the time, people don't like you because you're making deals, and it's a tough job, and it takes a certain personality, know. And I learned a long time ago that everyone doesn't have to like me, but I want them to respect me. And the people, and I don't like everyone either, but I'll hire certain people because they're really skilled at their jobs. Hopefully you hire people that you really like and make a good environment and the culture of the set, a nice place to work, and are really skilled at their jobs.
Now, when you were running sets like that, did you make a conscious effort to deliberately create the culture?
Yes, I always wanted, and Arnie Schmidt always said to me he wanted to hire more women, always, because he felt like that he didn't have enough women on the crew, especially in department head positions, that it felt like a construction site.
Arnie's no dum-dum.
He's so smart. And so in that sense, I always remember that in the sense of like trying to really balance the crew. And
what is kind of the palpable difference when you have more women in it?
I just think it's a good balance of having diversity, around you. And, whether it's within a department or, it's naturally more men because there are a lot of jobs that most women don't want to do, whether it's construction or blowing up things in special effects or they don't naturally gravitate to those departments. There are great women who do those jobs, but not as many. So it's just naturally, imbalanced in that sense.
So you have to make an effort to balance it out.
Yeah, but it's not hard to find that on Annihilation, which is one of the movies I oversaw at Paramount. We had a special effects coordinator and a stunt coordinator who were women, and it was fantastic.
Yeah, you don't hear that every day.
And it was a female cast, so it even became a better grouping. And so, the producer, she did a great job of balancing that and finding great talent. And again, it's like you really also want the best talent. It doesn't always end up being women or a diverse crew because that's just not how the cards fall. But, I know right now I have 3 movies that I'm overseeing and 2 of them have female line producers. 1 doesn't. But he's really amazing and he's doing a great job.
I think that's what we want to get
you
ultimately.
Want to always pick the right people and be aware of that. Can I balance this out a little bit?
We just want the list of all the right people to be very diverse. Yeah.
So.
And you did big, giant, like you did a bunch of Transformers, didn't you? Like big, giant kind of...
I did the first 4 Transformers. And that was an amazing experience. Like, everyone's like, how did you, work with Michael Bay, And I was like, he's very... Like, you have to be able to handle how he works. And some people who are great at their jobs just aren't interested in that. But he is so, knows what he wants in his head. Getting it out of his head is hard sometimes, and trying to figure out what he really needs. But he works really fast, which I really appreciate, and wants a smaller crew, which I appreciate as well, because I think sometimes we're too slow and we have too many people. And so I learned a lot, and my skills, I think, really got better from him and those kind of movies. And obviously working with Ian Bryce, who was the producer, we had a great partnership going around the world, and just realizing, when I first got the job on Transformers 1, they had all done multiple movies with Michael. Ian had done one before, but I asked, who is his crew, and are they, does it change all the time? Are we always trying to find new people? And he said, no, pretty much it's the same, and it's really good people.
Oh, that says something.
Yeah, and Michael's very loyal. And, then there were a few new people, like myself and the location manager and a couple other people, but then we ended up, you just kind of stay as a family in that sense of, we can do this together. Some people drop out because they don't want to do it anymore. It's too much traveling or whatever it is, but the people that did those movies were really amazing, in every level, whether it was a video assist person or the key grip, makeup artists, just pleasant to deal with, do their jobs 110%.
Well, and at the top of their game, right?
Yeah, you have to be, because you have to keep up with his energy. He'll arrive on the set. He might be late, but when he arrives, you don't stop.
Go.
And you go to these other cities, right, where you bring in some local crew, and they are literally exhausted at the end of the day. How do you keep up with him? It's well, you do it.
This is the pace. Yeah. Get on board.
Right. So I learned a lot, and I'm really appreciative of those movies with him.
Yeah.
And with Ian. And then Ian and I also did Hancock, Sony. So another great experience.
That's great. Now, coming up, as we're hearing story after story after story in the world, did you have to deal with shenanigans that you had to learn how to just shut it down and get on with your job?
I had a couple moments that I remember an executive once, when the producer introduced me to the executive. He had hired me to do the movie, and he introduced me to the executive, and he turned to the executive turned to the producer and said, "Oh, she's a pretty girl," in front of me. And I'm like, really? So I had a really hard time with that executive in the sense of how he not treated me in the sense of actual anything of harassment per se, but just not taking me seriously, that I was the person in charge. And just starting with that line, it's not okay.
That puts you in your place.
Right. And so I just knew that's who he was. I didn't deal with him very much. I said to the producer, you get to deal with him, because I'm not going to put up with that. I'll do my job. And it was a really good experience internally, but, with that person. And then I had another person once, try to... it always seems to be about power, wanting power over you. And that one I went to my boss and said, this isn't okay. And if anything goes further, then I'm going to file a complaint. And they shut it down. So, but still, what's hard about our business is people can have bad behavior, but because they have the creative talent, whether they're a writer or a producer or an actor, they get a pass. And you don't want to lose that talent.
Right.
And
do you think that's shifting a little bit now? Because before you never heard of a director getting fired, but every now and then we're having a couple now.
I think it's better, and I hope it continues to be better, but it has to start from the beginning, right, of who they hire. And but I don't know if they're aware of it, but then when they do become aware of it, they have to stop it. Say, yes, we love this script, but
you're too much of a liability.
Yeah, and I don't know if they have the guts still to do that.
I guess we'll see.
We'll see. I think that's what's so amazing about this time, is that between people feeling... I'll tell you an example. There are, we've always had to take sexual harassment classes, right? So even on films, every department head has to sit in a room with the studio person and take a class, take a test, and I think it's great. And we have safety classes, we have all those things that we have to do. But what happened in the past was the people above us, directors, producers, writers, didn't have to take those classes. They supposedly did, but they would always have a little private class, or so they weren't really even set up to be accountable.
Right, they're exempt.
Yeah. And, when an incident happens and an actor is part of it, the crew person gets fired, but not the actor because you have to finish the movie.
Well, sure, you can't replace the actor.
And they're the face of whatever movie.
Right.
So those things, I don't know if they will change because just the inherent nature in a sense.
Right.
But it's definitely better. And
so the effort has to be, don't do it in the first place.
Yeah, and when it first happens, it has to be dealt with immediately. So then that person hopefully changes enough that they don't do it again and realize that they could lose their career.
Yeah.
Because that's, people are losing their careers over this, and they should for their bad behavior instead of, making millions and billions of dollars with the bad behavior.
And having it go on for 20 years.
Right.
Hopefully that is going to end.
Yeah, I hope so. The other thing I think is really great right now is the trying to pay women on a more equal front than it's been in the past. When you're freelance, it's a little more transparent what people make, which is nice. And I always said to other women that when you're faced with a moment with negotiating, like in the workplace, you're equal with men. At home, you're the wife, the husband, you're different, right? You have a different relationship. But in the workplace, you're equal. And if you're doing the job and have the skills and have the experience, you're paid the same or more.
Yeah.
So I was always, very early on, I said to a friend of mine when she was negotiating her contract at a studio, I said, you have to be willing to walk away because men are willing to walk away. I don't know what it is in them. They're just different than us. And that's good. That's fine. But you have to think like a man when you're negotiating.
Right.
And you have to know what your bottom line is. And if it's not going to be met, then you walk away.
Do you think we tend to be more grateful for the job?
Yes. And more like deferential and more like, oh. But I learned that a long time ago. And then when I started doing the bigger movies, I'm like, I'm not going to make that money. I'm going to make what this person makes or more. I'm doing, one of the bigger movies in the world right now.
Yeah.
And so I held my ground and it worked. And I'm the same way today, like with negotiating and all of that, in the sense of I know my value. I also know what I might not make as much as somebody at another studio who has the same or less experience than me, but I'm not going to be the person that once I make my deal, I'm not going to harbor on that.
Right.
If I do, then I shouldn't make the deal.
So you're going to make a good deal.
Yeah.
And have peace in your soul.
And have peace in my soul, right? In that sense of this is the best deal I can make and this is what I'm going to live with and this is good for me. I get to stay at home. And that's one of the reasons I love this job. And I like the job at Paramount because it's a shift in my career, to do something different. Even though it's the same industry and I'm kind of doing the same job in the sense of the skills all translate to knowing how a budget should work, looking at a schedule, helping hire the crew, knowing if they're getting their day's work or how they're tracking budgetarily. I know all that, right? So it's great to have those skills in this job. But again, I can plan my life more. It's better for my life right now with my son and all of those things. So I think I also tell people when they're trying to figure out their careers, think of what choices you want to make. Can you go away for 6 months? Is that okay?
Yeah.
If that's not okay for you, then maybe work on a television show in town if you still want to be freelance. Or maybe find a staff job where you have a more regular vacation schedule where you can plan your vacation. You can go see your child's baseball game. You have to know that about yourself. You can try out freelance and say, that's not for me. I want to go here, And for me, the opportunity to come in-house at Paramount was such a gift.
Is this your first studio job? Mm-hmm. And how long have you been there?
4 years nearly.
Okay, let's talk about that transition.
So it was great. I was working on the fourth Transformer movie, and Michael Bay was really good about doing most of his movies in Los Angeles, but as you probably are aware, each year it just felt like couldn't justify losing that 25 or 30% rebate.
Yeah.
It's too much money when you're talking about $100 million movie.
Exactly.
It's you're going to give up $20 million. It's
not
good business.
Convenient.
It's not good business, right? Yeah. So by that time, the fourth Transformer, even though we still basically prepped it in LA, we did it all out of LA. And I realized this is not going to change. Once a Transformer movie that had so much weight and he had the ability to say, no, I'm going to do it in LA. Once I saw that he couldn't do that either and saw the value of leaving as well, then I'm I have to do something different.
And how old was your son at this point?
He was 12.
So before that, you'd been doing the Michael Bay movies in town?
Most of it in town.
Yeah.
We would go to Chicago for a few weeks, or we went to Alamogordo, New Mexico, to White Sands to, film for 2 weeks. The third one, we were gone a little bit more, but still, it wasn't, and it was in the summer for a month or 6 weeks. So again...
So it worked out.
It worked out great. He would come with me for part of it, so it was okay. But I realized that wasn't going to take a turn back to LA. So
it's not going to get better.
No. And it's gotten since I've been at Paramount for nearly 4 years, I haven't done one movie. I haven't overseen one movie in Los Angeles or California.
Wow.
So I realized that. And I was like, I need to change some things and figure out. So when Transformers 4 is over, I'm going to take a look and see what else I could do. Like, where do my skills translate? What else could I do other than the film business? And I didn't think of a studio job.
Oh, you were thinking about getting out completely?
Yes. And I didn't think of a studio job because people are in these jobs for a long time.
It's hard to get them.
It just felt like that. That was my perspective, right? And so I started thinking about other things. And I thought,
what were you thinking?
I thought about going to Pepperdine Law School to be a mediator.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I thought, I mediate all day long and negotiate. Right. So maybe that's a skill that I could just hone, get a degree, and, become a mediator.
Yeah.
Set my own hours, work in LA. And
it's a good backup plan.
It was. So I started that process of applying. And then I was doing reshoots on the first Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles for Paramount again. And Lee Rosenthal, my boss, called me one night and said, would you ever be interested in a studio job? I'm like, yes.
Yes, please.
Like, why didn't I think of that? And then I had a moment. I said, I just want to know, are you adding a person to your department, or is the person leaving? Is it okay? Because I knew them all, and I felt like a certain, I wanted it to be a good, positive situation that something was happening. He said, someone's leaving, and it's a good thing for them, and so we're looking to replace.
It's a win-win.
Yeah, so I was like, okay, yes, I'm interested. And I don't know if the person was leaving on a bad note, I would have said it. I just wanted to know that. And maybe that's being a woman, wanting to understand the whole situation a little bit
understanding
more.
Kind of the politics you're walking into.
Yeah, a little bit. So, but I still would have wanted the job, to be honest. And so I interviewed for it, and I talked to him about it. And again, it's really my first corporate job. It's the first time I have had an HR department, and it's different.
Yeah, how was that adjustment? It's a whole different ballgame.
It took a long time, and I said I needed a movie, to go through overseeing one movie to see the whole thing and how it all works, because it's very different. It's seeing the process way before it gets greenlit, which is nice. Being part of getting it greenlit and coming up with solutions, helping then once it's greenlit to drive it in the right direction so they stay on track, on budget, and we end up, with a good product. And, being part of that I like. And I like the way Paramount works. We work really closely with the creative team, which I hear other studios don't work as closely with, but I don't really know, but that's what I hear about us. But that's I know great. That for sure that we do. And I appreciate that they respect us that way and respect how we can help. As I always say, you want to get the money on the screen. So that's our job. You don't want to waste it. You want it on the screen.
And they probably love that.
And it doesn't matter if it's a $5 million movie or a $100 million movie. Every movie has budgetary issues of how to make it, get it down, get the budget down, and put it on the screen and make it for a good price. Because a $100 million movie could be a really good price movie. It's just, you get a lot more.
Yeah.
And you're doing
a lot of
more
moving parts.
Yeah. So, and I tell everyone this story. When I met with Lee, I said, when is your contract up? And he kind of was taken aback. And
that's a good question.
And he said, why are you asking me that? I said, well, I'm coming to work for you. And it's really important to me in my life who I work with and for, because I don't want to come to work having a stomach ache. I'm not doing that in my career. I haven't done it in years, and I'm not going to do it now. And he was just in the negotiation stage, right? And so it was all good.
He was like, why? What do you know?
And so he renewed his contract, and he's the best boss. I love him. What I love about him so much is I learn from him. And he's so good at navigating all the politics of the creative producers, the director, the stars, the talent. It's a great learning experience. And that's another thing I like in my life, is changing things so that I'm not doing the same thing all the time, that I'm learning something new. And so that's what I love about this job. It's, again, taking my skills from when I was a production manager and a producer, and now putting them to use in a different way, and also learning new things.
And were you surprised at the back end life of the film that you probably never had to deal with before?
I wasn't as surprised, because I had been a post-production supervisor. I'd gone through a few movies to the end. So I knew that a little bit, but we don't we have a whole post-production department and a whole visual effects department that deal with all of that and music. So we're part of it in the sense of all of us working together, but they are dealing with the day-to-day of post-production.
So you can hand it off at some point.
Yeah, we definitely hand it off. But again, we're always to the end. Like we're doing Mission Impossible. Mm-hmm. It's like everybody's together getting it to the finish line because it's going to be another great movie.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's exciting. So you're doing several movies at one time.
Yeah, I have Mission Impossible in post. I have a movie called Instant Family in production that the director who directed all the Daddy's Home movies. Mm-hmm. It's like more of a dramedy. It's about foster to adopt. Oh. It's a lovely story and I love it. And then I have Pet Sematary, the remake, prepping, and we're going to make a project called Sonic the Hedgehog with Neil Moritz and Sega, kind of a live action with a CG character. So
wow, you're doing it all.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
So, and we're really busy at Paramount. We've had a lot of changes at the top of Viacom and Paramount in the last year and a half. And that was interesting to see, like how people get ousted and
yeah.
I wasn't used to it. I don't know if I'm used to it yet. I joke. I said, I'm going to hear on deadline.com that I'm out. Instead of someone sitting me down and saying, Allegra, this isn't working out.
Right.
You just hear it on deadline.com.
Hopefully not. Jeez.
They do.
It's crazy.
It's so odd to me. It's like, can't you sit someone down and tell them that this isn't working out and have that? But it just happens.
Cloak and dagger.
And I think what ends up happening, actually, and to their defense, is that it gets leaked. And so they don't have the opportunity to sit the person down and say, we're going to let you go. And that's not fair to the person or to the company either. Because I know that we have a whole protocol of how we let people go, obviously. And people, the HR department is amazing and they deal with that really well. But when something gets leaked, then they just look like they didn't do their job. But
then
they probably didn't have the opportunity, right? So I think it's one of those strange things with the leaking and putting stuff out on social media and all that immediately where the company or the person doesn't have the chance to really follow protocol and be a human and say, this isn't working out.
Brutal.
Yeah, it's brutal.
So what do you make of the state of women in this business and the country and in the world at the moment?
It's a great time to be a woman in our business because I think if you're talented and skilled, you're going to get a lot of opportunities, right?
I think people are looking to hire women.
Yeah.
Good.
And, I worked on Fences and we hired this woman, Charlotta Bruce Christensen, to be the DP. She had done Girl on a Train and a couple other movies and was recommended to us through a few people. And she was amazing.
Good.
Did such a good job. And then we hired her to do A Quiet Place. And so she shot that. And so, it's like learning about the talent that's out there and knowing who they are. And I remember her agent told me about her. And I was like, oh, I never heard of her.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, how are you finding? Are you deliberately send me lists that have a bunch of women on them too?
Yeah, every list we get, we like to have a group of who's right for this project, right? First of all, who wants to do a horror movie, for example, or who wants to do an action movie? And I know the Rob Hardy, he was the DP on Annihilation, and he had done Ex Machina with Alex Garland, and super talented. And again, I had a great experience with him on Annihilation. And when it came to Mission Impossible 6, they were like, "How about Rob Hardy?" And I said he did a great job, and he ended up doing Mission Impossible 6, which is a totally different kind of movie from Annihilation. And he did an amazing job. It looks fantastic. So you always try to see the different talent and not just put them in a box like they can only do this kind of movie.
Right, because that happens so much.
Happens all the time. I did 3 Transformer movies and Hancock, right? Those were in a row. So big action movies. And Paramount said to me, we don't want to lose you. I got offered to do Iron Man, and they said, we don't want to lose you, so what would you like to do in between before we figure out Transformers 4? And there's a Katy Perry movie, a kind of documentary type style movie we want to make, or Paranormal Activity 4. And I said, I'll take Paranormal Activity 4. So meet the directors, meet the Blumhouse people, and we'll see. And I got the job. And two reasons I wanted to do that movie. One, it was in LA. And the second reason is I didn't want to get pigeonholed that I only did $100 million movies.
Smart.
Because people do tend to look at you that way. Oh, she can only do this. Or he can only do, small, who can do a small horror movie? Well, in my opinion, anybody can do a small horror movie. It's just you have to know what your parameters are.
Yeah.
You can only pay scale rates. You can't, you can't overpay people. You have to make really incredible deals. You have to make flat deals for equipment. All of that stuff that you have to just go into that mindset and say, I'm going to ask this gaffer, if he wants to be the gaffer on Paranormal Activity 4, because one, he's going to be in town and sleeping in his own bed every night. And a small movie that might fit in a window where he can go off to do Transformers 6 and 7 and whatever else he does.
Yeah, and if he bookended it with 2 Transformers that you helped him to
so
do.
I found a great crew and you try to do that and you sell it in a different way instead of like, okay, you're going to get your high rate, you're going to travel here and there, it's going to be amazing in that sense. But this is amazing because you're going to stay home every night and you're still making a good living.
And you'll go to your kid's graduation.
Yes.
So win-win.
You definitely want to have diversity in your own career too, because I think you have to create it naturally because people will pigeonhole you.
Right, so you have to make a deliberate effort.
Yeah.
What advice would you have for women who are just starting out now?
I would say one of the things is to try to, figure out sooner than later what area you want to be in, like whether you want to be in costume department or whatever that is, right? To try a few things out and then see what suits you. Also, like, it's not for everybody. And that's why I said earlier, like being freelance, very, very hard lifestyle. And you're really like a gypsy. You're traveling a lot. The hours it's not a glamorous business at all. We tell you when to be at the set and we tell you when you can leave.
And it's early and it's late.
Yep. It's nighttime. It's 6 days a week sometimes. It's 24/7 emails. People think, oh my God, you work in the film business.
Sunglasses and autographs.
Right? I said the only glamorous moments are maybe the very first early scout, which only 5 of us maybe go on. It's fancy, right? Where you fly with the director, you see the first kind of ideas of maybe going to Chicago or someplace, or the premiere.
There's a lot that happens in between.
Yes, so it's not glamorous. You work super hard. If you're not a really hard worker, you're not going to make it. And we've all done construction on our house, for example, right? And people don't show up. They don't do the job properly. It's like if anybody did that in the film business, you would never make it.
Yeah.
And so it's really the cream of the crop of people who work really hard, have good skills, and a good attitude. But I would tell women it's not for everybody, and it's particularly hard for women if you're going to have a family. It's really, you have to make that choice of like, am I going to travel a lot? And I did travel a lot with my child and my nanny, and my baby came to the office, and it was a whole thing of how to manage all of that and still have a job. And
it is not easy.
It's not easy. So it's like, it's not for everyone. It's not a bad thing if you don't want to be freelance in the film business, but you want to be in the film business. And there are other choices like working in a studio, working in an agency. There's so many jobs. Post-production is a great job because you tend to stay in town. Visual effects, you tend to stay where that company is. And Canada is a big, big hub for a visual effects company. So
I think that's the part that surprises people, I think, is not knowing how many different jobs there are in this business.
I know. We were talking about that, and I've spoken at a few like middle schools and other schools, and my purpose of my talk is to tell them how many jobs there are. You see the actors, and you might learn about the director or the writer or something like that, right? But you could do anything in the movie business. If you're really good at accounting and numbers, you can be an accountant, still be part of a movie. If you're good at building things, you can build houses or you can build sets.
You could be an electrician. You can be a painter.
It's just like, it's so creative in a lot of ways. Like in the construction department, I did American President, and we built the White House. And just to see those sets was so magical because they're all fake.
It is every time, isn't it?
Yeah.
Just when you think you're over it and cool about it, you walk on another set.
I know. And you look at it going, wow. And I remember on that movie on American President, there's so much art in the White House through all the hallways and stuff. So we had a whole plan of like A-level paintings, B-level paintings, C-level paintings. So the A's would be right next to any actor or any featured area. The B's were a little bit in the background. The C's were way in the background.
So that's a whole job, just the paintings.
Yeah, so we hired this person on the East Coast who did really good copies. Like that was his reputation. And he, for months, painted and had some other people obviously helping him. And then we created the Oval Office and made the rug and all the furniture to match. And at the end, it's like, what do we do with this? And I was like, no, we cannot. We're not getting rid of it.
Yeah.
So I said it was Castle Rock at the time. I said, we have to inventory everything. I'm going to hire someone to make a whole inventory and we're going to rent it. You guys should rent it out. And they rented it out for years.
That was your set. Because I've heard of this White House set that you could just go.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's a new one, but anyway. So
it makes sense. Everyone shouldn't have to reinvent the Oval Office.
And just and then how to. Yeah, so that was a really interesting, fun movie to do because you're creating something and you definitely can't go film there.
Yeah. Excuse us.
I know.
So I love that movie. What's next for you?
Oh, I want to stay at Paramount. I love it.
Forever.
I would. I really like it. I like there's so many great people there. Mm-hmm. And I love having the support from all the different departments. We have an amazing legal team and an amazing labor relations team and creative. And so it's nice to have that fallback. Like I can call any of the lawyers at any time and ask something. So I really like the group, and I love our finance team, all of those people. And again, that's what's so important to me. Like I like what I do, but it has to be in a good environment.
Yeah, that's great. And what a beautiful place.
I love it. I just don't like the commute.
Oh, you're way west side.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Well, it's LA, no matter where you go. 2 miles takes 2 hours.
I know. I used to joke when I was setting up offices, I want the offices on the west side and I want a movie in LA. And I was pretty good about getting that for a long time.
Nice.
Yeah. So other people had to commute. I had those shorter commute.
Right. So that was your turn, and you have the great job.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you. It's lovely.
You've been listening to The Other 50%, a herstory of Hollywood. I'm Julie Harris Walker. I'd like to thank Allegra Clegg for sharing her story. And special thanks to Jay Rowe, Danny Rosner, and Alice McQuaid for the music. Please find us on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Podbay, all the podcast places. Subscribe and leave a review wherever it is that you listen. And of course, you can see our website, theother50%.com, all spelled out in letters. For added features, bios, pictures, merchandise, please go there right now and subscribe. You can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter at Other50% and Instagram at Other50% Podcast. And also, go subscribe to Exit 38. Thanks for listening. See you next time.